You're listening to Human Rights Talks, organized by the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies.
Hello, my name is Kyle Matthews. I'm Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. As part of the Canadian Taskforce against online antisemitism, we're very pleased today to sit down with a very special guest. We are joined today with Katharina von Schnurbein, who's the European Commissioner responsible for dealing with combating anti-Semitism, often online. Katharina, we're very glad to have you with us today.
Pleased to be with you, Cal, yes.
So Katharina, maybe just because we're going to share this with our Canadian audience, but also other people working internationally that are looking at hate speech, incitement to violence, and where our institute is very special. We focus on genocide prevention, but our founders had members who perished in the Holocaust. So we have a deep-seated idea of how unchecked anti-Semitism can lead to human rights abuses and violence, and that's why we're doing this project to understand contemporary forms of anti-Semitism. But I would like to ask you, in your role, what is your work focused on, and how do you work with other EU member states?
Yes, I think what you describe is very much also at the heart of our understanding of our work on anti-Semitism, and in particular also with regards to the rising Holocaust distortion and Holocaust trivialization that we have seen, and maybe we'll discuss it later. But to understand that what we do is really a prevention also of what we have seen anti-Semitism lead to in the past, and that it has led to the Shoah, and therefore we need to fight it, in all its pernicious forms, wherever it occurs, whether it be online or offline, and in particular take the online very serious. So my position was created in 2015 together with a coordinator on combating anti-Muslim hatred. We have worked very closely with the member states, but also with Jewish communities from across the EU. We established a working group with member states representatives, and in fact we saw, following my appointment, appointments also on national level of special envoys on combating anti-Semitism. So we've created a network between us, and we meet together with representatives from the nationally elected Jewish bodies twice a year to discuss specific aspects. So education, the IRA definition, combating anti-Semitism online, Holocaust remembrance, Holocaust education, curricula, all these broad topics. And then we have engaged with the member states to really make also their own commitments. So in 2018, the first declaration ever was passed by unanimity in the Council, which is the institution that combines all the 27 EU member states. And they committed to using the IRA definition, and they also committed to having specific national strategies on combating anti-Semitism, and then reconfirmed that and enlarged it in 2020 to saying this fight against anti-Semitism really needs to be mainstreamed. So across the different policies. And in 2021, the Commission proposed its first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. And the second part is very important, the fostering Jewish life aspect to us. And member states then in 2022, just recently in March, put a date to their national strategies, and by the end of 2022 should all have national action plans or strategies against anti-Semitism. So it's been very much a work on moving the structures forward.
So Katharina, you mentioned that there has been a rise of Holocaust denial and so forth. I'm wondering, could you tell us a bit about the situation in Europe right now, and has there been a markedly increase in anti-Semitism as of late?
So we have seen anti-Semitism rise across EU member states in different forms. We have witnessed lethal attacks in some EU member states. We've seen it in Paris, in Copenhagen, in Brussels, the museum in Toulouse, Jewish school, so this has really been shocking, and I think also a wake-up call for the past decade. We see that Europeans increasingly recognize anti-Semitism as a huge challenge for society. Every second European sees this increase. And among the Jewish community, this perception is much higher. In fact, 9 out of 10 European Jews see anti-Semitism as a threat in their immediate environment. And worryingly, with also in a survey seen that 4 out of 10 Jews say they have considered leaving Europe. And we know that whenever Jews left Europe in the past, this has been very bad for Europe. So in addition to this situation that was already very worrying when I was appointed, we then had the pandemic. We saw an explosion of conspiracy myths of the involvement of Jews in creating the virus and spreading it and creating a vaccine to make money, all the old myths that came up again. And we did a study that compared the anti-Semitic content online in French and German language in January 2022 and February 2022 versus the next year, 2021, the 2 months. And we saw a 13-fold increase in German language and a 7-fold increase in French language. And this, I believe, is very worrying because we know that it takes to the street. We saw then in the anti-vax demonstrations, people wearing Stars of David, saying unvaccinated, comparing themselves in a situation where they are offered a vaccine in times of pandemic with the victims of the Nazis that were killed systematically during the Second World War. So, there is a clear loss of compass when you see this, and I think it's very worrying. And now, most recently, in the context of the war on Ukraine, I mean, Putin's propaganda all along has been to denazify Ukraine. And yesterday's comment by Foreign Minister Lavrov, his false claims, in fact, that to invert the victims and the perpetrator, and falsely and trivialized the Holocaust. I think this is, it's yet another step into this direction. So such propaganda really has no place in European democracies, and we really have to go against it.
Well, I just have to say that we've seen similar issues in Canada during COVID, conspiracy theories, blaming Jews for this. But yes, the recent comments by Russian authorities is also quite troubling, and perhaps at another level that we haven't seen in some time. I would like to maybe turn a bit about the EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life highlights the importance of education and training. I'm wondering, in terms of training and education on social media, are there recommendations in there for European society, governments? What kind of education is really needed?
So obviously, education is a very wide field. We have the traditional education, in schools, and this is key and needs to be continued and intensified, in fact. But indeed, with regards to online content, there are at the start, human brains behind any form of anti-Semitism and Holocaust distortion, even if then algorithms amplify it. So what we think is really important is a threefold approach. First, to have good legislation in place that makes sure that the platforms have certain obligations. We've long talked about a highway without rules. I think now the European Union, with recently passing the so-called Digital Services Act, has put in place rules which oblige the platforms to make their algorithms transparent vis-a-vis the authorities, to report on their actions, to have better redress mechanisms, and also give the possibility, sort of the teeth of this legislation, to have fines in case of non-compliance. So this is a very important tool. Then we need to prosecute online haters and also make sure that the platforms are in line with European legislation. And we have hate speech legislation in Europe, so they need to act in accordance with this existing legislation. And then this is one of an important action also in the strategy, is to really strengthen civil society, the trusted flaggers, the fact checkers, that can discern anti-Semitic content, know whether something is hate speech, therefore needs to be taken down, or whether it is conspiracy myths, disinformation, fake news, that is not necessarily illegal, but harmful, and therefore needs counter speech, needs redirection towards websites. In fact, we are now also building up websites with regards to facts upon on the Holocaust, and so to really make sure that we flood the net with correct information as well. So this network should be built up across the EU. We want to see this capacity in all EU languages, and also in languages that are not necessarily EU languages, but transport anti-Semitic content into the EU, and make sure that these civil society organizations and individuals and experts really are empowered to do their work on the net and flag anti-Semitic content.
I'm wondering, Katharina, as you say, the part of the plan is to flood the internet to go against conspiracy theories, anti-Semitic material. Is this strategy, is it planned to target everyone in the EU, or is there a specific focus on children? I'm wondering, what is the strategy of who primarily you would like to try to educate in the digital realm?
We have different strategies and different possibilities. It very much depends on the platforms. We know that some are more attractive to very young people, and others are more, my age or maybe even older. So what we have done in a campaign that we previously did, we can really target in specific member states specific age groups, because we have the tools to discern, which, for example, women 50 plus or something like this, because there is a specific issue, and that works with direct campaigns. I think there is a need, though, a much broader need also with regards to increasing the awareness about the necessity to be aware of history in a broader sense, to have a media competence that is often not necessarily there. I think the schools also have a responsibility, and of course the parents as well. Yeah. So it is broad, and what we also want to make sure is that we can react quickly. So, for example, last year when we saw this increase during the pandemic, we started a campaign together with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and other partners on Protect the Facts about Holocaust distortion, and another campaign, Think Before Sharing, about conspiracy myths. So to make sure that that content is out there that makes people reflect about what they are doing. Of course, you only get those, who otherwise might be ignorant. It's difficult to catch really the extremes. And I think that sometimes with regards to the extremes, it's also a question of law enforcement. We have legislation that will come into force now, for example, with regards to terrorist content online, that platforms will have to remove within 1 hour of public order or noticing it themselves. So, all this legislation together, hate speech, the Digital Services Act, and this terrorist content online makes a very strong legal framework as well.
Katharina, my last question to you, and you've given a really great overview, but also made us realize that the issue of anti-Semitism is not just a European issue, it's a global issue, and it's also an issue to Canada. And I'm wondering, given the really detailed strategy that your office has been responsible for, what can Canada learn from the EU approach? And are there areas where perhaps Canada and EU could collaborate on this space, be it governing digital spaces or countering programs in English or French? Wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, I think in fact there are quite some similarities when it comes to the awareness, for example, of anti-Semitism, but also the knowledge about the Holocaust. 22% of Canadian millennials, as far as I know, are not sure if they have heard about the Holocaust, and also even 15% of Canadian adults. And we have similar challenges in Europe. So, this is something where I think something we need to address. In the end, one thing we say also with regards to the fact that more and more Holocaust survivors are passing away, and that we will find new ways on how to transmit the knowledge about the Holocaust. And I always say it should be like the French Revolution. We don't have any survivors anymore, but we all know how important the French Revolution was for human rights, for Europe, and in a similar way, we need to be aware of what the Holocaust meant for the creation, for example, of the European Union and also the United Nations. So these kind of, I think, this knowledge is something that we all share across the globe, and where we can certainly also work together. And we, in fact, do also in international fora already, and certainly could do so also bilaterally.
Well, let's hope that this is the start of more collaboration. But on behalf of my colleagues, Katharina at the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies, and through our project, the Canadian Taskforce on Combatting Online Antisemitism, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to Canadians about the important work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure, and congratulations for the excellent work you do.
Thank you.